All right, Shabbos, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking all of our sponsors, Baruch Hashem, many sponsors for today's shir. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Tikva Esther, Simcha, Avigayil, Milana and Milicenta. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. The Daf Yomi shir for sponsoring the shiurim this month in the schus of refuah shlema for Yehuda Ben Michal, our week of learning sponsors. Bill and Razy Eskin, in memory of Bill's father Mordechai ben David, Razy's mother Tivya Bas Moshe Aaron, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today: Ken Creeger, Alan Myrowitz, Moshe Werdesheim, Gregg Levitan, in honor of Alan Wiseman's 80th birthday. Mazel tov, may Hakodosh Borchu bench you, Alan, with arichas yamim v'shanim gesund ad 120 shanim tovos. To thank Alan Wiseman for dedicating today's shir, with thanks to Hashem for allowing me to reach a significant birthday without the need for a walker with tennis balls. Incredible! Wow, that's may we all be zoche and yahrzeit Hashem to make that shir dedication. Incredible. And to thank Hananiah and Merav Lasker for dedicating the shir today in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Hananiah's father, Yosef Reuvan HaLevi ben Avraham. We hope in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Hashem will have an aliyah, the family in Nechama. We hope in the merit of our Torah, Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. So with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chof Tes 29. We are picking up on Chof Ches Amud Beis 28b at the two dots, about 20 lines up from the bottom. So just remember again, in yesterday's daf, we introduced the concept, the really fascinating halachic idea that an adult could testify about events which he experienced during his childhood. So we gave a whole bunch of different examples of that. So the example we're up to right now is Beis HaPras. The Gemara says, like almost like right in the middle of the daf, on Chof Ches Amud Beis 28b. V'shamakom hazeh Beis HaPrasu. So one of the things that an adult is permitted to go ahead and testify about is that he remembers that as a child, from his childhood, this field is a Beis HaPras. So let's remember again, what's a Beis HaPras? Rashi says over here, Rashi gives a good explanation. Beis HaPras, hachorishas hakever, hare ose Beis HaPras, mea amo. Shikach shiru, shachamacharisha moleches es asamos hames. V'dilma naga bo, o hisit hamahalich bo, etzem kisora, shemtayim mago masis. What's a Beis HaPras? Beis HaPras is a field in which I know there was a grave. What's the problem? The field was plowed over. What's therefore the concern? That as a result of the plowing, halacha l'maisa, bone fragments may have been scattered over the course of the field. The problem therefore is if I traverse the field, we have an issue either of coming in direct contact with bone fragments, or for that matter what? Hovering over a bone fragment. If I come in contact with a bone fragment, now again, there's halachas with that. In other words, a bone fragment the size of a wheat kernel could go ahead and convey tumah through maga and maso, ultimately through carrying or through contact. But tumas ohel, also hovering over a bone or flesh for that matter, could also go ahead and convey tumah. So we'll say this is the concept of a Beis HaPras. So what the Mishnah is therefore telling me is that a child, an adult, is permitted to come to Beis Din and say, listen, I remember from my childhood, this field is a Beis HaPras. So says the Gemara, listen to this. So why is that? My time, why is it that the adult is believed to give testimony about something that he knows from his childhood? It's very simple. Beis HaPras d'Rabbanan. I will say, remember again, the common theme amongst all of these items is, when are you believed in your adult life to give testimony about something you experienced in your childhood? When? In Dinei d'Rabbanan. So the concept of a Beis HaPras is a D'Rabbanan. So that's why ultimately, again, in this case, the adult is believed. So the Gemara says, how do we know it's a D'Rabbanan? I will say, because interestingly enough, how do you go ahead and navigate a Beis HaPras? It's actually an interesting idea. What do? You walk through it very slowly, and essentially you blow on the earth in front of you. That way, if there is a bone fragment that is there, you'll expose it. Menapech on the Beis HaPras Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami, B'shir Rabbi Yehuda Amar, Beis HaPras Shenidash Tar. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda says that Allah L'maisa, if you have a Beis HaPras Shenidash, now we'll say Nidash in this context means what? That there's an incredible amount of pedestrian traffic. Rashi says Shenidash Disha Rabba Beraglayim Harbe. If you have a field in which there was a heavy volume of pedestrian traffic, halacha l'maisa, there is no concern of tumah. Why? My taima i'afshar li'etzem kisor shelo nidash beregal. Because we'll say, remember again, at the end of the day, halacha l'maisa, what are we concerned about in the Beis HaPras? We're concerned about in the Beis HaPras that there may be a bone fragment. So we'll say, if you have heavy volume of pedestrian traffic, whatever bone fragments there are, what's happened to them? They've been trampled. And it's because they've been trampled, they've probably been reduced to such an insignificant size that they don't even have the ability to truly convey tumah. So that's the halacha. We'll say it's another example of where an adult is believed to give testimony about something that he experienced in his childhood. Next, however, va'ad kan haynu ba'in b'Shabbos, an adult is permitted to go and give testimony from his childhood, saying, up until here was the Tchum Shabbos, kasaver Tchumin d'Rabbanan. Ultimately, again, because he holds that halacha l'maisa, the tchum, concept of tchum is a d'Rabbanan. So once again, you have a situation of an adult giving testimony about something that he perceived as a child regarding a din d'Rabbanan. Incredible. So ve'eina aman lomar derech hayel leploni b'makom zeh maimad umispad hayel leploni b'makom zeh. But there are exceptions to this rule. For example, an adult is not permitted to say, I remember from my childhood that Reuven bought this field from Shimon. Right? That he's not believed to say. Or another example, I remember as a child that when Reuven's family members passed away, they always used to eulogize their family members in this spot. My time. So we'll say, why is the aid, not believed in this case? We'll say first of the intermediate wide lines. My taima, afuki mamara lo mafkinon. The will say it's very simple. Because when you give testimony, right? Imagine I come to Basin, I say, I remember from my childhood that Reuven bought a field from Shimon. I will say, what am I doing? Based on that, if that testimony is believed, based on that testimony, what's going to happen? The potential is money could be extracted. So I will say, remember again, as we've established, the only time that you're believed to testify in your adult life about things that you experienced in your childhood is dealing with what? Dinei d'Rabbanan. But once we're talking about monetary claims, that's no longer Dinei d'Rabbanan. That's already, again, Dinei d'Oraisa. Therefore, even though it is an adult witness who is testifying, because he's testifying about things that he experienced during his childhood, he is not believed. So the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, Ne'aman hatinok lomar, kach amr li abba. Interesting case. Under the Raisa, a tinok is a child is believed to say, now we'll say, again, when we say that the child is believed to say, it's the same case. An adult is believed to say, in my childhood, X, Y, and Z. So what is he believed to say? Ne'aman hatinok lomar, kach amr li abba. I remember, so an adult is saying, so I remember as a child, my father told me, Mishpacha zu tahora, mishpacha zu timeya. This mishpacha is tahar, this mishpacha is tameh. To which the Gemara says, tahora utimeya sadaita. What does that mean? What does that mean? That my father told me one family is tahar, one family is tameh. Ella mishpacha zu kshera, or mishpacha zu psula. Rather, again, a child, or I should say an adult, is believed to say, I remember as a child, my father told me, this child has good genealogy, right? Fit genealogy, and this family has compromised genealogy. Before we go on, I'll just mention something. There's an incredible Moshe Haskell in this. If you look at this line in the Gemara, so the Gemara, what does the Gemara say? Ne'eman hatinok lomar kach amar li abba. Right, a child or an adult is believed to say, I remember as a child when my father told me, Mishpacha zu tahora, Mishpacha zu timeya. If there's one thing that children remember about their family as they get older, is how their family talks about other people. Right, I will say, so a child will remember, oh, my father used to talk nicely about that guy. didn't speak nicely about that guy. Mishpacha zu tahora, mishpacha zu tmeya. I would say our children learn so much from our own interpersonal conduct. And if they see us treating other people with dignity and respect, they remember that even into their adult lives. Conversely, if our children see us or hear us speaking Lashon Hara, if our children see us engaging in negative interpersonal behavior, if our children see us deconstructing or maligning others, ultimately, Ne'eman Tinok Lomar, that Tinok will grow up into an adult and will very often replicate that very same behavior. And so often in life, proper chinuch has very little to do with kind of what we tell our children to do and has everything to do with what we do ourselves. Because ultimately, again, it's our own parental behaviors that often serve as the greatest chinuch for our children. Such an incredible yisod that Chazal are teaching us. The Gemara goes right there. By the way, I'll just point out it's in so many different areas in life. I often think to myself, just in my own life, that like the greatest chinuch moment for your kid is the greatest moment for the chinuch when you had a terrible day and you walk into the house. So you ever have a day like that? I had a day like that. It's like, yeah, it was yesterday. It was Tuesday. Let's say you have an incredibly stressful day. You're stressed out. You're hungry. You're upset, you're annoyed, and now you walk in the house. I will say, there's like that temptation when you walk in the house after a day like that. I'm going to be curt. I'm going to be like a little bit like annoyed. Like don't talk to me. How you decide to enter into that house, right? How your kids see you in that moment when you walk in. I always feel like that is the greatest moment of chinuch, because if my kids know, bad day, I'm stressed out. Things are difficult, but yet I speak to their mother nicely. I'm courteous. I'm kind. I give people the time of day. Most incredible chinuch. Okay, and then the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, furthermore, v'ne'eman lomar. V'shachanu b'ktsatsa shabas ploni leploni. We'll see what that means. And again, an adult is believed to say, as a child, we ate of the kitsatsa. We'll see what that means in just a moment. Of ploni leploni. V'sheinim olichin chalo u'matnos leploni kohen. Ayidi atzmo avalo ayidi acher. Furthermore, again, we'll say this already goes back to the Mishnah, that ultimately, again, a child is believed to say, or an adult is believed to say, as a child, I remember we used to take chalo, in other words, kohanic chalo, matanos, kohanic portions, to so-and-so who is a kohen. But that's dafka if the adult is recalling childhood events that he himself participated in, and he's not recalling that which someone else did. V'kulan, im haya ovid kocham v'nis gayer, even v'nishtachar ein ne'emanin. I will say, this is fascinating. But when does the halakha, this is dafka in a case of an adult Jew remembering something from his Jewish childhood. But let's say you have someone who converted. Right? So if someone who converted, a convert is not believed to give testimony about things that he experienced during his Gentilehood. Similarly, an Eved who was emancipated. So when you emancipate an emancipated Eved becomes fully Jewish. So halacha l'maisa, an Eved is not believed to testify about things that he experienced during his Eved days. So the Havamina is, you might have thought, that the same way that an adult is permitted to go ahead and testify about things that he perceived during his childhood, at least with Dinei D'Rabbanan, the same would apply about a convert, right, from his Gentile days, and an Eved from his Eved days, or I should say, a Jew from his Eved days. Kamash Malam, no. This is only a din by a Jewish adult in his Jewish childhood, but not by anyone else. We'll see why. However, the adult is not permitted to testify, or is not believed to say regarding his childhood. So also we saw this already before in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, they're believed. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Michal, what is that statement going on? In other words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Michal is saying, no, that the child is believed. What case? Or I should say, someone is believed. Which case is he arguing on? To which the Gemara says, Ilema Aseifa, if you want to say it's the last case, that the Tanakh is saying that an adult is not believed to go ahead and give testimony regarding his childhood, regarding monetary matters. And you see Rabbi Yochanan ben Michal is coming to argue on that. That can't be. Afuke mamonahu. We'll say no one is going to say that an adult could extract money from someone based on testimony in his childhood. That cannot be. Ella Aresha. Rather, it has to be talking about the earlier case. What was the earlier case? The kulam im hayu ovid kochav v'niskayer eve v'nishtachrer ein ne'emanin. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omer ne'emanin. Oh, they both say, here we go. Here is the point of contention. Here is the machlokes case. What's the machlokes case? Watch this. The machlokes case is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, the Tanna Kama said, it is only a Jewish adult who is permitted to go out, who is believed, to go out and give testimony regarding something he experienced in his Jewish childhood. But a Gentile who converts can't give testimony from his Gentile days. An Eved who's emancipated now becomes Jewish can't give testimony from his Eved days. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, yes they can. Yes they can. What's the pshat? To which the Gemara is Makim Miflagi, Tanna Kama Savar, Kevan Da'ovei Kochavim Hu, Lo Havadayik. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Savar, Kevan Da'daiti Legire Meida Kavadayik. So I will say, it seems to be, so listen to this. Tanna Kama holds, they will say, since a Jew may be sensitive to certain things, those sensitivities may exist even during his childhood. That's why he's believed to go ahead and testify in his adult life about things that he perceived in his childhood. So for example, a child may be sensitive already to the laws of Tum and Tara. Therefore, he's believed to say about a Beis HaPras. Or for that matter again, a child may be sensitive to who's getting Truma. Right, who's getting matnos kuna? But a Gentile is not sensitive to any of these things. That's why once a Gentile converts, as a Jew, he can't give testimony based on things that he experienced or perceived in his Gentile life. However, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says no. It's fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, listen, a convert often doesn't go out and just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to convert. I'm going to totally upend my life and become Jewish. There's a process. And often Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says those Judaic sensitivities are often intact even earlier. So therefore, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says a Gentile often does have those Judaic sensitivities even during his Gentile life. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, we will believe a Gentile, or we'll believe a convert to testify about certain things that he perceived during his Gentile life, because we believe that he may already have possessed some of those Judaic sensitivities. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. My kitzatza. We'll say, what's the kitzatza case? Remember again, one of the examples of halacha l'maisa, where we're going to go ahead and believe an adult to give testimony about things that occurred in his childhood, is that we ate kitzatza. What's kitzatza? The Tanna will say, watch this. Ketzad kitzatza. It will say last 4 lines of the parak. Ketzad kitzatza. Echad mina achen shenasa isha shena geneslo. Here's the case. If you have a brother who's marrying a woman who's not really fit for him, then I will say this could be a couple of different cases. I'll give you just a classic example. Classic example could be a Kohen who's marrying a grusha. Let's just go with a simple case. A Kohen is marrying a grusha. Now, the Maharsha points out over here, you could have less dramatic cases. In other words, it doesn't necessarily have to be an isser. It could be a situation of some type of suffix. But let's go just with an isser. So we'll say, so what happens? So bo'in b'nei mishpacha. So right, let's say there's a bunch of brothers. Right? Elazar, Itamar, Nadav, and Avihu. And what happens? Elazar is marrying a grusha. So what would often happen? Bo'in b'nei mishpacha. So the members of the family would come. Umavin chavis malaya peros. And they would go and bring a big barrel filled with fruits. And what would they do? V'shovrin oso be'emtza rechava. They would bring the barrel like into the middle of the town square, and they would break the barrel in the middle of the street. V'omrim, and they would say, Achinu beis Yisrael, our fellow Jewish brethren, Shimu, please listen. Achinu, Ploni, our brother Elazar, Nosa isha she'ena hogeneslo. Our brother Elazar went ahead and married a woman who is not fit for him. Umisyarim anu shama yis'ari zaro b'zarenu. And we want to make a very important announcement. We are concerned that his offspring is going to get mixed in with our offspring. His offspring, right? Unfortunately, because he's marrying the wrong person. So l'maisa again, halacha l'maisa, his offspring is going to be compromised. We're concerned that a shadow of genealogical doubt is going to be cast upon our extended family. Therefore, again, understand Bo ukichu lachem dugma ledoros shelo yisarev zar'o bizar'enu. Come take a fruit and let this fruit be a sign that we are going to distance him from our family and know that our offspring is not mixed up with his. V'zohi kitzatza. And I will say this is the case of kitzatza. Shatinok ne'aman laha'id aleha. I will say this is the case. So the Maharsha has a whole discussion over here. So the Maharsha discusses the idea about why it's called kitzatza. He says, Umilas kitzatza, yesh lefarish k'moshe omrim al-zachar hapachos kotzeitz. V'chin omar on the keva pchusa kitzatza. I will say, when someone wasn't behaving correctly, they often used to call them a kotzeitz. A kotzeitz. That was like lashon of kitzatza means from lashon to cut something, or something that is cut down. So obviously the direct reference is to the breakage of the barrel. Right? So the breakage of the barrel is lashon of kitzatza. The idea over here the Maharsha says, children love fruit. So we'll say, what would happen when you break a big barrel of fruit in the Shusarabim? Just to give you like a contemporary mashal. You want to know what happens when you broke a barrel of fruit? Watch what happens in an ufruf, in shul on Shabbos, right? So the same way, like, it's like Lord of the Flies over here. Mamish, it is like, get out of the way or you will lose a limb. Right? So Lamaisa again, the same way, it's the survival of the fittest. By an ofruf, right? And every kid remembers the ofruf. So when you break a barrel of fruit, that's why the kids came running. So it's interesting that kids remember stuff like that. Kids remember stuff. So therefore, again, Allah Lamaisa, an adult is believed to testify that he remembers the kitzatza from his childhood. Good. I will say, Hadron Allah Isha Shenis Armala. Mazel tov. New parak. Here we go. It will say, Elu naros sheshlam kinas. So I will say, we are now dealing with an interesting topic. Going to be dealing with two cases. The cases of ones and mafuta. The case of a man who violates a woman. The case of a man who seduces a woman. Now, while there are similarities, halachic similarities, to the penalties in those cases, we're going to see some significant distinctions as well. So look at Rashi. So let's Rashi translate the phrase. Elu naros sheshlam kinas. These are the women who have a kinas. Now we'll say, look at Rashi. Now again, actually, when these are the women who have a kinas, these are the women whom, if chas v'shalom, one violates these women, there is a kinas penalty payment. Look at Rashi. Elu naros dafka nara mishiyaviyah shtei sa'aros ad sheti bager ve'im shisha chadashim shebei naros levogeres. Now, I will say, we're going to see, by the way, first machlokes in the Mishnah is, we'll see in the Gemara about which type of girl, which type of woman is in this parsha of Kinas. So we'll see. Because remember again, Nara, Rabbi say, doesn't just mean a young girl. Nara refers to a very specific stage of 12 years old to 12 and a half years old. 12 years old and 6 months. So we'll get into this in the Gemara. Shras Rashte Sheshlan Kinas Im Ansa Adam. Now we'll say here, the Mishnah is beginning to talking about the case of Ones. The case of a man who violates a woman. Rashi says, Im Ansa Adam, no sin la'aviyah chamishim kesef kidichsiv, v'nasan ha'ish hashochev. So we'll say, we're going to see that when a man violates a woman, there's multiple layers of punishment associated with that. So right now, what the Mishnah is focusing on over here is the direct financial penalty of 50 silver pieces. Now again, there are other penalties as we're going to see. When a man violates a woman, chas v'shalom, it's no different than any other case where one human being injures another human being, one Jew injures another Jew, where there's multiple layers of compensation. Right, sheves, ripui, boshes, all different kinds of things when you injure someone. But leaving that aside, the focus over here is on the specific financial penalty of 50 silver pieces. So, elu naro sheshlan kinas. These are the women who, if chas v'shalom a man violates, are subject to the kinas penalty, the 50 silver shekel penalty. Who are they? The Gemara says, habala mamzeres, if a man violates a mamzeres, va'al hanasina, or he goes ahead and violates an asina. Rashi will say, who are the asinim? Rashi says, mina give onim vihi asur lekal. The David gazra leim kidamrina biyavamis va'al shem v'yitnem Yoshua chot ve'itzim. So we'll say, remember again, the Nesinim go back already to the times of Yoshua. They were the Givonim, right? Ultimately, remember again, the Nesinim disguised themselves as some foreign nation, when in fact they were a Canaanite indigenous nation. Because they disguised as a foreign nation, Yoshua made a treaty with them. But after he discovered the fact that they were lying, he couldn't really go back on his word. So he relegated them to the status of water carriers, tree choppers. David HaMelech made the Gzeira that they cannot marry into the general population. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, Nesina, man violates a Nesina. Or a Kusis. I will say, who are the Kusim? Remember again, Kusim were people from Kusa. They were conquered also by Shalmaneser, the king of Ashur, uprooted from their land and transplanted into Eretz Yisrael. Rashi points out that there's a machlokes regarding the Kusim. They converted. Were they legitimate converts, not legitimate, illegitimate converts? That's a machlokes. Our Tana holds that they were illegitimate converts. Again, we'll get into all of this. Kusis, Habala Giores. Similarly, again, if a man violates a Giores, a convert, Va'ala Shvuya, or a woman who was taken captive, Va'ala Shifcha, or a maidservant, Sheniftu v'sheniskaru v'shenishtachreru, Pchusos mibnos shalosh shanam v'yom. But I will say, this is another interesting detail. The specific penalty for violating a woman in 50 silver pieces is dafka adin in besula. So the Gemara gives an example over here that similarly, again, if a man violates a convert, an emancipated slave, an emancipated servant, or a woman who was taken captive, but all of these women converted before, emancipated before, or ultimately, again, were redeemed before, or younger than the age of 3 years old. Because I will say, then ultimately, again, we assume that they are a besula. In any of these cases, if a man violates one of these women, he's subject to the financial penalty. So we'll say, but what happens if a man goes ahead and violates his sister? Va'al achos aviv, or his father's sister. Va'al achos imo, his mother's sister. Va'al achos ishto, his wife's sister. Va'al eishes achiv, his brother's sister. Va'al eishes achi aviv, or ultimately again, the wife of his father's brother. Va'al hanida, or he violates a nida. We'll say, yesh lahem kinas, that both say the common denominator amongst all of those women we just mentioned is halacha l'maisa. Relations with them is punishable by kares. Punishable by kares. If a man violated one of these women, whose relationship with whom is punishable by kares, nevertheless there is still a financial penalty. Why? Ain't bahem misas bezdin. Because ultimately, again, there is no misas bezdin in this case. I will say, here, the Mishnah is referencing another very important concept, which is kimei b'derabimine, which means that when you do something which results in two punishments, one of them being a death penalty, you get the more severe punishment, and the second punishment is essentially dispensed with. I will say, I'll give you a simple example. It's a really simple example of this. You go ahead, Reuven goes and intentionally burns down Shimon's field on Shabbos. And I will say, he burns down Shimon's field with Eidim and Hasra. So he's done two things. What has he done? He's been Mechal al Shabbos, because lighting a fire on Shabbos is prohibited, and that carries a death penalty with it. And he's financially harmed Shimon by ruining his crop. Again, this case is also interesting because here's a crime towards Hakodosh Borchu and a crime towards another person. Okay, but just for illustration purposes, since he's getting the death penalty for violating Shabbos, ultimately, again, he's going to be exempted from financial compensation. Okay, so just an example. What is the Mishnah introducing us to? The concept of killing midrabimine only applies when we're talking about a death penalty administered by courts. But if we're talking about kares, which is bidei shamayim, in the hands of heaven, then we don't apply the concept of killing midrabimine. We look at it as only having one punishment in front of you, namely the financial punishment. So therefore, again, interestingly enough, if a man goes ahead and violates a woman who is punishable to him by kares, there will still be the financial penalty for violating her. Fascinating. I will say, by the way, of course, I just want to point out, it goes without saying, but sometimes the things that go without saying are still important to say. Here we're talking about the act of a man violating a woman, just from a penalty perspective, financial penalty perspective. Just to be clear, obviously, again, the horrible transgression, the wrongness being Adam L'Chavero, and the wrongness of it on every single level goes without saying. Here, the Mishnah is analyzing this act in one very specific area, namely the one of financial compensation. But do not think for a moment that in the eyes of halacha, the act of a man violating a woman is only a financial issue. It's chas v'shalom. It's a moral issue. It's a transgression issue. It's a crime against another human being of the highest grace. Also, remember again, just to give you the raya to this. What happens halacha l'maisa if you see a man attacking a woman? You see a man about to violate a woman. What's the halacha? Right? You are mechuyev to kill him. You're mechuyev to kill him. Because the act of a man violating a woman is an act of ritzicha, right? Is an act of bloodshed. He's no different than if you see Reuven running after Shimon with a knife. You're chayiv to go ahead and kill Reuven to prevent him from going ahead and killing Shimon. If you see a man trying to violate a woman, that man is a rotseach. That man is a murderer, and therefore halal, because the act of violating a woman is perpetrated by a person ready to commit an act of bloodshed. So halachim, I said that person has a din of a rotseach. So just to understand, we're looking at this purely from the lens of compensatory damages. This isn't even damages. This is knas. Right? You also remember, I just mentioned this as well. In the realm of financial payments, there's two different types of financial payments. There's penalty payments and compensatory payments. Right? Remember again, so compensatory payments means, I break your arm and therefore you can't work. So that's a compensatory payment that I have to make. Versus knas. We'll say, what's knas? How do you know when something is a knas? How do you know when it's knas? When it's a set value and applies to everyone, irrespective of their circumstances. So here's a perfect example of knas. A man violates a basula, 50 silver pieces. Where'd you get that from? Right? What does that represent? It represents what Hakodosh Borchu wants the violator to pay, and therefore again it's knas. Good, let's go. Gemara. Haninaros psulos is isli knas ksheros lo. So it's like the Mishnah structure is so interesting. The Mishnah says these are the women for whom you are obligated to pay a knas. Then I will say, what's the list in here? Right? What's the list? The list ultimately again is of women who are genealogically compromised. So I don't understand. You're only chayiv for paying a knas. Ultimately, again, for women who are psulos, but not for women who are ksheros. To which the Gemara says, no, lo hachi kamar. Elu na'aros psulos sheyesh lahem knas. We'll say we're going to see the Mishnah say no. The Mishnah means to say Elu naros psulos. Here we'll say, I know that obviously a woman of genealogical fitness, if a man violates her, there's going to be a knas. What's the chiddush of Osai? You might have thought that Allah Chalamaisa, maybe there's no knas for psulos. That's the havamina. Maybe there's no knas for a woman who's genealogically tainted. Kamash malon, there is. Incredible. Nara in kitana lo. So also remember again, the Mishnah said elu naros, which makes it sound like the knas is only applicable for a nara, not anyone else. Right? A kitana. We'll say, what about again? Remember, as I said, nara is only from the age of 12 to 12 and a half. What about chas v'shalom, someone younger? So it sounds like over here from the Mishnah that there's no knas in such a situation. To which the Gemara says, Man Tana, Amar Yehuda Amarav, Rabbi Meir he. We'll say our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. What does Rabbi Meir hold? The Sanyo, Kitana, Mibas Yom Echad, Va'ad Shetavi Shtei Saros, Yesh La Mechar, Ve'in La Knas. We'll say very interesting case. Umishatavi Shtei Saros, Va'ad Sheti Bager, Yesh La Knas, Ve'in La Mechar, Divi Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, here's Rabbi Meir's Shita. Let's translate it and then we'll analyze. Rabbi Meir says, a kitana, from the age of 1 day up until she brings signs of physical maturation, which we'll say means the age of 12. Let's go means at the age of 12. So from 1 day until the age of 12, yesh la mechar ve'in la knas. Mechar means her father has the ability to sell her as a shifcha. Right? The same way the father has the ability ultimately again to go ahead and give her into marriage. Saloch l'maisa, her father has the ability to sell her as a shifcha as well. And I will say, whenever the father has the mecher right, there is no din of knas. There's no din of knas. However, again, after she sprouts signs of physical maturation, until Bagros, which is 12 years old to 12 and a half. Yesh l'knas ve'in l'mecher. According to Rabbi Meir, a father loses rights in his daughter at the age of 12 years old. So once she turns 12, he no longer has the ability to marry her off, nor does he have the ability to go ahead and sell her as a shivcha. The moment that his rights of sale end, the knas of ones, of violation, applies. So according to Rabbi Meir, these two things never overlap. So when there is rights in mecher, there is no knas, and when there is knas, there is no mecher. Shai Rabbi Meir used to say, Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein knas, v'chol makom sheyesh knas ein mecher. Shabbos say, this is the Rabbi Meir model. This is Rabbi Meir model. Rabbi Meir says, whenever a father has a right to sell or marry off his daughter, she's not subject to knas. And whenever she's subject to knas, there are no rights of mecher. So just remember this, because we're going to talk about this a little bit. So again, in Rabbi Meir's model, so the girl's maturation goes like this. From the age of 1 until the age of 12 years old, a father has the right to marry off his daughter and to sell her as a shivcha. There is no din of knas for such a girl. Once she turns 12, halacha according to Rabbi Meir, a father loses all rights in his 12-year-old daughter. He can't marry her off, and he can't sell her as a shivcha. In that moment, the obligation of knas, if a man were to violate her chas shalom, ultimately again applies. And I both say, when does knas apply until? This is interesting. Rabbi Meir's model, where does the din of knas apply until? Bagros. Bagros occurs at the age of 12 and a half. So I both say, it's interesting that according to Rabbi Meir, the din of ones, of a man who violates a woman, really only applies these specific halachos. Again, when I say the din of ones, the obligation to pay the 50 silver pieces only applies when? In a very narrow window of 12 to 12 and a half, which is quite fascinating. I will say, what happens if a man violates an adult woman? What does that mean? So we're going to see, it might mean that there's no specific knas of the 50 silver pieces, but of course, violating a woman is an attack. So because it's an attack, it's dealt with in halacha as any other situation where one person damages another person. So in laws of damages, as I said, there are 5 different categories of compensatory damages. But halacha l'maisa, again, in the specific case of knas, of the penalty payment for violating a woman, in Rabbi Meir's model, it only applies during a 6-month window. Now the Chacham disagree. The Chacham say, Kitana, Mibas shalosh shana v'yom echad ad shetibagar yesh la knas. So what's that? The Chacham say no. The din of knas applies already from the age of 3 years old and 1 day up until bagros, up until the age of 12 years old and 6 months. So we'll say, so again, now here's what's interesting. What does everyone seem to agree on? What does everyone agree on? That the end of knas is when? The end of knas is when? Bagros. So fascinating. Again, we'll have to see where that comes from. But Allah might say the end of knas is bagros. The machlokes chacham say, but the din of knas already applies from the time that the girl is 3 years old in 1 day. So the Gemara says, knas in mechalo, do the chacham mean to say that the din of knas applies from 3 years old in 1 day, but not the din of mecher, not the father's ability to either marry off or sell his daughter as a shivcha? Lo ema amabeis af knas. Right? Af kinas b'makom mecher. They will say, according to the Chachamim, the Chachamim say that the rights of kinas and mecher overlap. So I will say, what we have is something really fascinating. So according to Rabbi Meir, halacha l'maisa from the age of 1 day until the age of 12 years old, a father has the right of what we call mecher. Mecher means sell his daughter as a shivcha, marry her off. But according to Rabbi Meir's model, where there's mecher, there's no kinas. Kinas only begins at the age of 12 and goes from narus to bagros. That's it. According to the Chachamim, there's a profound overlap between these rights or between these concepts. According to the Chachamim, from the age of 3 years old in 1 day, father has the right of mecher. Right, the father can go ahead and sell his daughter as a shivcha, marry her off, and at that point in time, the din of knas applies as well. And when does knas go until? Up until bagros. So therefore, I will say, the Gemara is just pointing out over here that our Mishnah seems to reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. Because what does Rabbi Meir hold? Right, Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa. Watch this. The Mishnah says elu naros, which sounds like the din of knas only applies to a nara. How old is a nara? How's a nara? 12 years old to 12 years old in 6 months. So the Gemara says our Mishnah must be reflecting the view of Rabbi Meir. Again, we'll see Allah Lamayz by Paskin, but the Mishnah must be reflecting the view of Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara says, "V'hani b'nei knasanenu." So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, "Are these girls in the Mishnah really considered to be b'nei knasa? V'amai." Why ultimately again? I will say. So let's analyze this a little bit. So now here's what I've got. The Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. And the view of Rabbi Meir is that it is a nara who is subject to kinas. A nara is subject to kinas. So now, not only that, what does the Mishnah introduce to us? Even if a nara is a psula, she's still subject to kinas. The Gemara says, "V'amai." Why? Why is it that a nara who is psula is subject to kinas? After all, listen to this. V'amai ikri kan v'lo siya leisha. So isha haru'iyalo. Shabbos, listen to this. The Gemara says as follows. Take a look. The pasuk says, the pasuk says in the case ultimately again of kinas, the lashon of the pasuk is v'nasan ha'ish hashochiv ima la'avia na'ara chamishim kesef. Pasuk says ultimately again that when the man violates the woman, he will give her father. Again, we'll discuss why the penalty. Forgot your tefillin. Yeah, right. So the pasuk is going to talk about over here. Halacha. Oh, cold. Sorry. Right. So it's not cold. It's not cold. Right. So actually, don't do it. Don't do it. Because I'm going to be schwitzing. I'm going to get grumpy. Don't do it. Right. So I'm just going to put it down in 5 minutes. So the idea over here is as follows. The pasuk says we'll discuss why the penalty payment goes to the father. We'll discuss that. But alocha l'maisa, the pasuk says that the violator will go ahead and give to the father of the girl chamishim kesef v'lo siya leisha. We're going to talk about this concept, and she becomes a wife to him. We have not discussed this. All we've discussed so far is the concept ultimately again of paying the financial payment. There is this fascinating concept that when a man violates a woman, he's obligated to marry her. He's obligated to marry her. So I will say, so the pasuk says v'lo siya leisha, and what do you see from that? Isha haru'uyalo. Now, both say, let's talk this out for just a moment. In order for there to be a concept of what? That the man has to marry a woman. What has to happen, Rabbi say? What has to happen? She has to be marriageable. Right? In other words, she has to be genealogically fit that he's permitted to marry her. Isha haru'uyalo. So Rabbi say, so if that's the case, it's interesting. Based on that concept, that there's an obligation of the ma'anis, of the violator, to marry his victim. So I would have thought dafka that the knas wouldn't apply to psulos. Why not? Because halacha l'maisa, the ma'anis, the violator, can't marry this woman. To which the Gemara says, "Va'amai ikri kan v'lo siya leisha, isha ru'iyalo, amar Reish Lakish, na'ara hana'ara." So what says this? Reish Lakish says in this section, the Torah says as follows. The Torah uses the word na'ara 3 times. And I will say, in reality, it's not 3 times. In fact, it's really 2 times. So I will say, the pasuk the Gemara is quoting is, Ki matzeh ish na'ara b'sula, asher lo arasa. A man will find a na'ara b'sula, who is not betrothed, utefasa v'shachav ima v'nimtzu. So I will say, so the pasuk says, na'ara hana'ara, which really means, it says na'ara twice. In the second time the pasuk says the word nara, it says it in a elongated form, hanara. So that makes it as if ultimately again the word is said 3 times. So why 3 times? Chad l'gufei. One is the teacher says it applies to a nara. The chad la'asuyei chai be ladin. The chad la'asuyei chai be krisos. I both say it's a drush on the pasuk. Since there are extra usages of the word nara, so one nara comes to teach that the din of ones, the din of violation, only applies to a nara. Second nara teaches me that the din of nara applies even to who? A woman who is an Isser Lav, and one comes to teach you that it applies even to what? Chayve Krisos. Incredible. Shabbos say, Reish Lakish says, you would have thought the Havamina is that a woman who you can't marry, you're not allowed to marry. Ultimately, there should be no din of the knas. Kamash no, we make this drasha. Rapapa says, same idea. Besula, besulos, ha-besulos. I will say the pasuk uses the word besula twice, and we make it into 3 times because it says besula, besulos, and it doesn't just say besulos, it uses the elongated form of habasulos. That gives you 3 words to work with. Chad legufei, one teaches you that halacha l'maisa, this knas only applies in the case of a besula. The chad la'asuyei chayvei lavin, one comes to include a girl, ultimately again, who is prohibited to the ma'anes, to the violator as a lav. The chad la'asuyei chayvei krisos, and one comes to include ultimately again a girl who is a chiv krisos. So both say the common denominator of Rish Lakish and Rapapa, they're darshaning different words, but lamaisa it's the same model of drasha, which is you have certain words which are being repeated multiple times. Multiple times. Why is it being repeated multiple times? To allow you to darshan those words, bless you, to include other people who you would have normally exempted. So again, because over here in this context, halacha l'maisa, there's an obligation of the ma'anes, of the violator, to marry his victim. You might have thought, therefore, the knas only applies in the case of a woman whom he can marry. Kamashon Rish Lakish says, Nara, Nara, Hanara, Rapapa, Besula, Besulos, Habesulos. The extra words are teaching me that the knas penalties apply even in situations where what? The aggressor cannot go ahead, the perpetrator cannot marry the victim. Rapapa, my time, Rish Lakish. Say, why does Rapapa darshan Besulos? Why doesn't he darshan Nara? Why, like Rish Lakish? Because according to Rapapa, you need the Nara for a different drasha. Damra Abaye, Ba'aleho umesa pater. Let's say a man violated a woman and the victim died. Not necessarily as not a result of the violation. Let's say something else happens. She gets hit by a car and she dies. What's the halacha? In that case, the perpetrator is not obligated to pay the penalty payment anymore. Why? So because the pasuk says the perpetrator will pay the avi hanara, la'avi nara below the avi mesa, to the father of the girl and not to the father of the deceased. Okay, so the point also is that Rapapa uses nara to teach us a different drasha. Reish Lakish, my time, Rapapa. Why doesn't Reish Lakish hold like Rapapa? Because ultimately, again, Rish Lakish uses besula for gzeira shava. What's the gzeira shava? The sanya kasef yishkol kimar habesulos. Ultimately, again, he will pay. He will pay. Right? This is the perpetrator. The perpetrator will pay kasef, silver pieces, kimohar habesulos, shehezeh kimor habesulos, or mor habesulos kazeh. Rabbi said we're going to see this is to make a gzeira shava between the case of ma'anes and pitui. Remember again, I mentioned at the beginning of the parak, there are 2 cases. There's a case of the man who violates a woman, and there's the case of a man who seduces a woman. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, "Mibayle l'gzeira shava." Rashi says over here, "Besula d'chsiv kavim mefata mibayle l'gzeira shava." Besula. Both say it says besula by mefata, by the case of the man who seduces a woman. It says besula by mefata, and it says besula by ma'anis, by violating. That makes gzeira shava between mefata and ma'anis. What does gzeira shava teach me? That just like by the case of ones, halacha l'maisa, there's an obligation to pay 50 silver pieces. So too by the case of ones, of mefata, of seduction, there's an obligation to pay 50 silver pieces. Incredible. Reish Lakish also requires, ultimately, again, the same halacha on Abaye, that if the girl dies, you're not obligated to pay the penalty. So doesn't he need the drasha for that as well? To which the Gemara says, Ella, Rapapa nami Abaye l'gzeir Rapapa, Reish Lakish nami Abaye l'cheda Abaye, Rapapa nami Abaye l'gzeir Shava. And we'll say, here's the problem. Everyone needs all of these drashas for all of these halachas. So what's going on over here? Ella, here we go. We'll say, this is actually fascinating. She's a cry tziri. They will say, here's what I know. What I know is I have 6 words to work with. What are the 6 words to work with? Nara, nara, hana'ara, besula, besulos, habesulos. Right? That's what I know. And I will say, here's also what I know. Trelu gufayu. See, I will say, ultimately again, halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa. I know that I need 2 of those words to teach me the core halachas, namely, that the halacha applies to a besula or a nara who's a besula. I know that I need one of these words to teach me the halacha of Abaye, namely, you're only obligated to pay the penalty if the girl is still alive. V'chal gzeira shava. I also know that I need another one of the words to create the gzeira shava between mefata, seduction, and violation. Ayasru le trey. Ayasru le trey. There are two words left. Chad la'asuyei chayvei lavim, v'chad la'asuyei chayvei krisos. One is to include the fact of Osai, that even if a man violates a woman who is prohibited by Allah, he still has to pay the penalty. And one is to include, to me, the halacha, that even if a man violates a woman as a chiv kares, he is still obligated to go ahead and pay the penalty. So I will say, essentially what the Gemara just said is like this. We have a pool of words for drashas. And I know that some have to be used to teach us a kor halacha, some have to be teach us Abaye's halacha, or Papa's halacha. I should say one is needed for the Gzeir Shava, one is to teach us the drush that the girls will still be alive. But other than that, you have extra words. So however you want to apply those extra words, that's up to you. But everyone agrees on the core drushas. It's pretty incredible. And I will say this comes to exclude the following time. The Sanya, lo siya isha. The pasuk says if a man violates a woman, he's obligated to marry her. Shimon Timani Omer, isha sheyeshba havia. Well, Shimon HaTimani says that in fact the halacha only applies in a situation where a man is able to marry this woman. So Shimon HaTimani says that halacha l'maisa, if a man violates a woman who he is not able to marry, then these halachas do not apply. Shimon Menasya Omer isha haru'ya l'kaima. Shimon Menasya says it only applies to a woman who you can engage in a sustainable marriage with. My benai, I will say, what's exactly interesting these two approaches? I will say, mamzeres unesina ika benayu. I will say, here's the chilik. Mamzeres or nesina. What does that mean? So I'm Rabbi Zera. So Lemand Amar Yesh Bahavia Hanam Yesh Bahavia. I will say, according to the opinion who says that you just have to be able to marry a woman. I will say, can you marry a mamzeres? Can you marry a mamzeres? The answer is yes. It's usher, but can you affect marriage? If you give a mamzeres a ring, is it a marriage? And the answer is yes. So if it's about the ability to marry, then the knas will apply to these women. But I will say if it's about a sustainable marriage, then although you can affect a marriage with a mamzeres, that is not a sustainable marriage. We'll say we'll stop over here for today. We're stopping a little bit mid-discussion. We'll pick up a Myrowitz tomorrow with Rabbi Akiva. Shkoyach.